Rachel Morgan had always prided herself on knowing her husband completely. After 25 years of marriage, she could predict David's responses to almost any situation, anticipate his needs before he voiced them, read his moods from the slightest changes in posture. There were no mysteries between them, or so she believed, until the manila envelope arrived. It was an ordinary Tuesday in September. Rachel sorted through the mail, bills, advertisements, a postcard from her sister traveling in Greece, when she noticed the envelope with no return address. Just David Morgan, handwritten in unfamiliar script, the letters pressed firmly into the paper as if written with particular intent. She set it aside on David's desk, thinking nothing more of it until 3 days later, when she needed a stamp. From the drawer. The envelope was there, now opened, its contents removed. Normally she wouldn't have thought twice about it, but something. The way David had been distracted lately, the late-night phone call he'd taken in the bathroom last week gave her pause. The drawer wasn't locked. That was the thing about trust. It created a peculiar kind of vulnerability, assumptions of privacy that weren't explicitly enforced. Rachel hesitated only a moment before sliding it open further, telling herself she was being ridiculous even. As her heart began to race, inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The letter was brief, just a few typed lines. "I've respected your wishes for 20 years, but it's time for truth. She deserves to know her father. I'm sorry, but I'll be contacting her next week. She's already asking questions I can no longer deflect." The photograph showed a young woman in graduation attire, early 20s, dark hair, serious eyes that looked unsettlingly familiar. She was standing between an older woman Rachel didn't recognize and David, her husband, his arm around this stranger's shoulders, his face alight with unmistakable pride. Rachel stared at the date stamp in the corner of the image, May 15th, just 4 months ago. While David had supposedly been at a civil engineering conference in Boston. The room tilted slightly as Rachel sank into David's desk chair, the letter trembling in her hand. She had given David 2 children during their marriage, Jacob, now 23, and Emma, 20, but the young woman in this photo was neither of them. David had another child, a daughter he had kept secret for what appeared to be her entire life. Rachel sat motionless at David's desk, the photograph still clutched in her trembling fingers. Outside, she could hear the ordinary sounds of their suburban neighborhood. Children returning from school, a lawnmower droning down the street, the familiar beep of the mail carrier's truck, the mundane backdrop to her world, shattering. 25 years of shared holidays, family vacations, parent-teacher conferences, 25 years of building a life with a man she thought she knew completely. Yet here was evidence of a life he'd kept hidden from her, a child he'd never mentioned. She checked the time. David wouldn't be home from his engineering firm for another 3 hours. 3 hours to decide how to handle this discovery, to process this seismic shift in her reality. Her first instinct was to call someone, her sister Melissa perhaps, or her best friend Kate, but the thought of saying the words aloud, of making this betrayal real by sharing it, stopped her. No, this was between her and David, at least until she understood the full scope of his deception. Rachel studied the photograph more carefully. The young woman, David's daughter, looked to be about 22, perhaps a bit older, which meant she had been born before Rachel and David met. Not an affair, then. That realization brought a small measure of relief, quickly swallowed by fresh questions. Why had he never told her? Had he known about this daughter when they married? Had he maintained contact all these years? She flipped the photo over, looking for any additional information. Nothing. Just the date stamp and what appeared to be a university logo partially visible on the young woman's graduation gown. Rachel turned to her laptop, searching for university. Graduation ceremonies on May 15th. After several attempts, she identified it as Northeastern University in Boston. where David traveled at least twice a year for conferences and client meetings. Rachel's stomach clenched as the pattern emerged. For 25 years, her husband had been living a double life, devoted husband and father in Connecticut and, what? Occasional father to this other daughter in Massachusetts? The logistics alone made her head spin. How had he maintained this deception for so long? And who was the mother, the woman who had written that letter demanding he finally tell the truth? The sound of the garage door opening jolted Rachel back to the present. She glanced at the clock in confusion. 3:15 p.m. David wasn't due home until after 6:02. She quickly returned the letter and photograph to the drawer, her heart racing. She needed more time to think, to plan her approach. She wasn't ready for this confrontation, but fate had other plans. David's footsteps sounded in the hallway, followed by his voice calling her name. Rachel. Are you home? My afternoon meeting got cancelled, so I thought I'd... He appeared in the doorway of his home office, stopping abruptly when he saw her seated at his desk. Oh, there you are. What are you doing in here? Rachel looked up at the man she'd shared her life with, seeing him with new eyes. The silver threading his dark hair, the laugh lines around eyes that matched the ones belonging to the unknown young woman in the photo, the wedding ring he'd never removed in 25 years of marriage. David, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. We need to talk. His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something Rachel might not have noticed if she hadn't been looking for it. Wariness, concern. He glanced at the desk drawer, then back to her face. About what? He asked, his tone carefully casual as he set his briefcase down. Rachel had planned to be strategic, to approach this conversation with calm rationality. But seeing him standing there, maintaining the facade of normalcy even now, something snapped within her. About your daughter, she said bluntly. The one graduating from Northeastern last May. The one you've kept secret from me for our entire marriage. The color drained from David's face. For several seconds he said nothing, his body unnaturally still. Then he seemed to deflate, dropping heavily into the chair across from her. You found the letter, he said, not a question, and the photograph. Rachel watched him carefully, searching for any sign of the husband she thought she knew. 25 years, David, 25 years of marriage, and I had to find out about your child from a threatening letter. It wasn't threatening. He began, then stopped himself. That's not... Elaine wasn't threatening me. She was just... He trailed off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so familiar it made Rachel's chest ache. How much do you know? Almost nothing, Rachel said, fighting to keep her voice level. I know you have a daughter who appears to be in her early 20s. I know you attended her college graduation in May when you told me you were at a conference. I know her mother's name is apparently Elaine, and she's tired of keeping your secret. Her voice cracked slightly. What I don't know is why you never told me about her. Why you've been living this lie for as long as I've known you. David's shoulders slumped. He looked older suddenly, burdened in a way Rachel had never seen him. Her name is Cassandra, he said quietly. She's 23, and I've known about her since she was 2. 2, Rachel repeated, momentarily confused. But that would have been 3 years after we were married, David confirmed. I didn't know she existed when we met, when we got married. I swear to you, Rachel. The timeline recalibrated in Rachel's mind. Not a child from before their marriage then. Which meant, you cheated on me, she said, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. In 25 years, she had never once doubted David's fidelity. It had been the bedrock of their relationship, unwavering trust, complete transparency. Or so she had believed. It was one night, David said, his voice barely audible. One stupid, drunk night at a conference when Jacob was just a baby. I was overwhelmed with new parenthood, with work pressures. He shook his head. There's no excuse. I made a terrible mistake, the worst of my life. Rachel thought back to that time, Jacob as a colicky infant, the sleepless nights, the strain of David's recent promotion. She'd been consumed with motherhood, often too exhausted for intimacy. Not that it justified anything. "And you never thought to tell me?" she asked, anger finally breaking through the shock. "Not when it happened, not when you found out about the child, not in the 21 years since." "I wanted to," David insisted, leaning forward. "God, Rachel, I almost did so many times, but at first Elaine didn't want anything from me. No support, no involvement. She had just taken a job in Boston, was focused on her career. She only told me about the pregnancy because she felt I had a right to know. And later," Rachel pressed, "when Cassandra was 2 and Elaine contacted you?" David sighed deeply. Elaine's circumstances had changed. Her mother, who had been helping with childcare, became ill. She reached out to ask if I would contribute financially to help with a nanny. He looked down at his hands. I agreed but remained uninvolved otherwise. "So you've been sending money to Boston for 21 years. Rachel struggled to reconcile this with their joint finances, which she had always believed were completely transparent. "How?" "We share all our accounts." "I have a separate account," David admitted. "I deposit a portion of my bonuses there." It was never a significant amount, just enough to help with Cassandra's education, some extras. Each revelation felt like another blow. Not just the affair, not just the secret child, but hidden finances as well. The foundation of their marriage seemed to disintegrate with every word. "When did you start seeing her?" Rachel asked, remembering the photograph, the evident pride in David's expression. "Because that picture wasn't of a stranger, David. You know her." David nodded, guilt etched in his features. "When she was 10, she started asking questions about me. Elaine contacted me, asked if I would be willing to meet her." He swallowed hard. "I couldn't say no. She was my daughter, asking to know who her father was. So for 13 years you've been what? Taking secret trips to Boston to play dad?" The bitterness in Rachel's voice surprised even her. "While I believed you were at conferences, client meetings, what exactly were you doing?" "It wasn't like that," David protested. "At first it was just once or twice a year. As she got older, maybe a bit more frequently. A weekend here and there, school events sometimes." "Her graduation," Rachel said flatly. David nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Yes. And Jacob and Emma. Do they know they have a half-sister?" "No." David's response was immediate. "No one knows. Not my parents, not my brother, no one." Rachel stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air. The office suddenly felt too small, too confining. The weight of David's deception was suffocating. "Rachel, please," David said, rising as well. "I know this is a shock. I know you must hate me right now, but you have to understand." "Understand what?" she interrupted, voice rising. "That you've been lying to me every single day for 21 years, that our entire marriage has been built on deception." She shook her head in disbelief. "I don't even know who you are anymore." "I'm the same man you've always known," David insisted, taking a step toward her. "One terrible mistake doesn't erase 25 years together." "But the lie does," Rachel countered. "The daily, deliberate choice to keep this from me, to maintain a relationship with your daughter while ensuring I never knew she existed." A sudden thought struck her. "Does she know about us? About Jacob and Emma?" David's hesitation was answer enough. "She does," Rachel realized. "Your daughter knows she has siblings, knows about your other family, while my children have been kept in the dark. How could you, David? How could you do this to them?" "I was trying to protect everyone," he said weakly. "Cassandra, Jacob, Emma, you. I thought it was better this way." "Better for whom?" Rachel demanded. "For you, certainly. You got to avoid the consequences of your actions. Got to play father to Cassandra without any of the messy complications of actually integrating her into your real life." It's not like that, David repeated, though his protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I tried to do right by Cassandra without hurting my family here. We're all your family, Rachel said, the realization painful as it formed, or should have been, but you never gave any of us that chance. She moved toward the door, needing space to process, to breathe. I can't do this right now. I can't even look at you. Rachel, wait, David called, desperation edging his voice. Elaine's letter, there's more you need to know. Cassandra wants to meet you, meet Jacob and Emma. That's what this is about. Elaine is insisting that it's time for the secrecy to end. Rachel paused at the doorway, not turning around. Well, at least someone in this situation has a moral compass, she said bitterly. When were you planning to drop this bombshell on us, or were you hoping to keep stalling until Elaine gave up? David's silence was damning. That's what I thought, Rachel said quietly. She continued down the hallway to their bedroom, the room they'd shared for 25 years, the space where they'd conceived their children, shared dreams, weathered illnesses, celebrated anniversaries. All while this secret loomed, unknown to her. She closed the door firmly behind her, sinking onto the edge of the bed as the full impact of what she'd discovered began to register. Not just the affair, a 2-decade-old infidelity that, while painful, might have been forgiven if confessed at the time. Not even just the child born of that affair, a complication that would have been difficult but not insurmountable. No, what threatened to break her completely was the calculated, sustained deception, the thousands of opportunities David had had to come clean, to bring his daughter into their family, to allow Jacob and Emma the chance to know their sister. The fact that he had chosen, day after day, for 21 years, to compartmentalize his life so completely. Rachel's phone chimed with a text from Emma, away at college in her junior year. Video chat tonight. Need help with apartment hunting. Options for next year. Her daughter's ordinary request, her normal life continuing while Rachel's had just imploded, brought a fresh wave of pain. How would she tell Emma? How would she tell Jacob that their father had another child, a sister they'd never known existed? Another text arrived, this one from Jacob. Hey, Mom, is Dad around? Trying to reach him about the tickets for next weekend's game. The Mets game. David and Jacob's annual tradition, a father-son ritual that Rachel had always found endearing. How many similar rituals had David created with Cassandra over the years? Had he ever had to juggle conflicts, choosing which child's event to attend? A soft knock at the bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. Rachel? David's voice was hesitant. Can we please talk about this? There's so much more to explain. She didn't respond, couldn't find words adequate to express the maelstrom of emotions churning inside her. I know you need time, David continued after a moment. I'll give you space, but Elaine is expecting an answer soon. Cassandra graduates with her master's degree in December. She's hoping all of us could be there. The audacity of the request momentarily stunned Rachel. Her children were expected to discover they had a half-sister and then attend her graduation as one big happy family. Within 3 months? Go. Away, David, she finally managed. I can't deal with this right now. She heard him sigh, then the sound of retreating footsteps. Alone again, Rachel tried to imagine a path forward from this revelation. 25 years of marriage, 2 children, countless shared memories. Could all of that withstand this level of betrayal? And if not, what did that mean for her future? At 52, she had never imagined starting over without David. A buzz from her phone, still clutched in her hand, drew her attention. An email notification from an unfamiliar address, elaine@barrettogmail.com. Subject line, About Cassandra. Rachel stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the notification. Did she want to hear what this woman, this stranger who had known about her for 21 years, while she had known nothing, had to say? After a moment's hesitation, she tapped the email open. "Dear Rachel," it began, "I realize this must be an enormous shock to you. I've urged David for years to be honest with you and your children about Cassandra's existence. I want you to know that I never expected or wanted him to compartmentalize his life this way. When Cassandra began asking to meet you and her siblings several years ago, I supported her desire. David always had reasons to delay, waiting until Jacob graduated high school, until Emma adjusted to college, until various milestones had passed. I finally realized he would always find a reason, and that's why I sent the letter. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. If you're willing, I'd like to talk, not just for Cassandra's sake, but because I think you deserve the complete truth that David has been unwilling to provide. My number is below. Elaine." Rachel set the phone down, unsure how to feel about this unexpected communication. There was something almost respectful in Elaine's tone. No defensiveness, no hostility, just a straightforward acknowledgement of the situation and an offer to provide context David might withhold. Outside the bedroom window, Rachel could hear David in the driveway, car keys jingling, the sound of his sedan starting, then pulling away, running away from the confrontation, just as he'd run from the truth for 21 years. Rachel picked up her phone again, staring at Elaine's number at the bottom of the email. She wasn't ready to speak with this woman, not yet, but she saved the contact information, sensing she might need it soon. Instead, she called the one person she trusted most in the world. "Melissa," she said when her sister answered, "I need you to come over. Something's happened." She paused, still struggling to form the words. "It's David. He has another daughter, a 23-year-old daughter I never knew existed." The shocked silence on the other end of the line was followed by her sister's immediate support. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As she waited, Rachel moved to the window, watching the familiar street where they'd raised their family. The maple tree they'd planted when Jacob was born, the driveway where Emma had learned to ride a bike, the garden they'd tended together every spring. Everything looked exactly the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. Melissa arrived with a bottle of wine and the determined expression Rachel had come to rely on during every crisis since childhood. 3 years older and infinitely more pragmatic, Melissa had always been Rachel's anchor when life turned turbulent. "Start from the beginning," Melissa said, after Rachel had shown her the letter and photograph. They sat at the kitchen island, the familiar setting feeling strangely foreign in light of Rachel's new reality. Rachel explained everything, finding the envelope, confronting David, his revelations about the affair and the daughter he'd hidden for over 2 decades. "The bastard," Melissa muttered, pouring more wine into Rachel's glass. 21 years. I can't even wrap my head around that level of deception." "Neither can I," Rachel admitted, turning the photograph over in her hands. "I keep trying to understand how the man I've lived with, raised children with, could compartmentalize his life so completely. How many lies that would require day after day, year after year." "What are you going to do?" Melissa asked, ever the practical one. "About David, about this Cassandra." The name still felt strange to Rachel, this unknown person who shared her husband's DNA, her children's blood. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Part of me wants to throw David out, call a divorce attorney, burn everything he owns in the front yard." Melissa nodded approvingly. "I'd help with the bonfire. But there's Jacob and Emma to consider." And Rachel hesitated, trying to articulate the confusion of emotions swirling within her. 25 years of marriage isn't something I can just erase, no matter how furious I am. And this girl, woman, Cassandra, none of this is her fault." "True," Melissa conceded, "but you're not responsible for fixing the mess David created. You're allowed to be angry, to take time figuring out what you want." Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from David, Staying at the Marriott tonight. I understand you need space. Please let me know when you're ready to talk. He's not coming home tonight, Rachel said, showing Melissa the message. Good, her sister replied firmly. You need time to process without him hovering, trying to manage your reaction. The characterization struck Rachel as uncomfortably accurate. David had always been a problem solver, approaching emotional situations with logical strategies. She imagined him in his hotel room, crafting arguments, preparing explanations designed to minimize the damage. The thought made her stomach clench. Elaine emailed me, she said suddenly, remembering. Cassandra's mother, offering to talk, to give me the complete truth that David might not. Melissa raised an eyebrow. Are you going to contact her? I don't know. Part of me is curious. What kind of woman has kept this secret for all these years? Did she know about me from the beginning? What has she told Cassandra about us? Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples where a headache was forming. But another. Part of me isn't ready to add her perspective to this mess. I'm still trying to process David's betrayal. What about Jacob and Emma? Melissa asked gently. When will you tell them? The question Rachel had been dreading most. Her children, now adults with their own lives, but still her babies in so many ways. How would they react to learning their father had hidden a sister from them their entire lives? I need to tell them soon, she acknowledged, before Cassandra. Or Elaine reaches out directly before they hear it from someone else. She tried to imagine the conversation and failed. But not tonight. I need to figure out what to say, how to say it. Want me to stay over? Melissa offered. Guest room's still made up from my last visit, I'm assuming. Rachel nodded gratefully. She couldn't face the empty house alone tonight. Couldn't bear the silence filled with 25 years of memories now cast in shadow. As Melissa went to retrieve her overnight bag from the car, Rachel found herself drawn back to the photograph. Cassandra's features were a blend. David's eyes and jawline, but with softer contours that must have come from her mother. She was smiling in the image, but there was something reserved in her expression. A guardedness Rachel recognized from her own children when they were uncertain. Had Cassandra grown up wondering about her father's other family? Had she felt the absence of siblings she knew existed but hadn't been allowed to meet? The thought pierced Rachel's anger, introducing an uncomfortable empathy for this stranger who was, by blood at least, her children's sister. You look like you're a million miles away, Melissa observed, returning with her bag. Penny, for your thoughts? I was thinking about Cassandra, Rachel admitted, wondering what this has been like for her. Melissa set her bag down, studying her sister carefully. That's very generous of you, considering the circumstances. Not generous. Just... Rachel searched for the right word. Complicated. Everything about this is so damn complicated. Later, in that night, after Melissa had retired to the guest room, Rachel found herself at her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Before she could reconsider, she typed Cassandra Barrett Boston into the search bar. The results appeared immediately. AEI LinkedIn profile showing Cassandra Barrett, master's candidate in environmental engineering at Northeastern University, previously employed as a research assistant at MIT's Water Resource Management Lab. Rachel clicked through to the profile, studying the professional headshot of the young woman from the photograph. Without allowing herself to overthink, Rachel opened Elaine's email again and hit reply. Elaine, thank you for reaching out. I'm still processing this revelation and not ready to speak yet. But I would like to know more about Cassandra, her life, her relationship with David over the years. When I'm ready, I'll call. Rachel. She sent the email before she could change her mind, then closed her laptop and moved to the bedroom. The king-sized bed she'd shared with David for decades seemed impossibly large now. The empty space beside her, a physical manifestation of the void his deception had created. Morning arrived with the harsh clarity that often follows emotional upheaval. Rachel's first conscious thought was that it hadn't been a nightmare. Her marriage really had imploded. Her husband really had hidden a child from her for 21 years. She reached for her phone, finding texts from both of her children. Normal, everyday messages that pierced her heart with their innocence. Emma asking about borrowing money for a class trip. Jacob confirming plans for the weekend. Neither aware that their family structure had fundamentally changed overnight. There were also 3 missed calls from David and a voicemail she couldn't bring herself to listen to yet. And 1 new email from Elaine Barrett, sent at 6:17 a.m. Rachel, I understand completely. When you're ready, I'm here. In the meantime, I've attached a few photos of Cassandra through the years. She's a remarkable young woman who has always known about you and your children. She's never felt anything but curiosity and hope about someday meeting you all. Take all the time you need. Elaine. Rachel hesitated before opening the attachment. A PDF containing half a dozen photographs. Cassandra as a young child on a swing set, as a teenager holding what appeared to be a science fair trophy, in hiking gear on a mountain trail, and most recently in a lab coat beside complicated-looking equipment, her expression serious and focused, a life documented in images. A person, not just an abstract concept. Jacob and Emma's sister, whether they knew it or not. The sound of the front door opening startled Rachel. She glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. Too early for Melissa to have gone out and returned. Rachel, David's voice called tentatively from downstairs. Are you home? I saw Melissa's car in the driveway. Anger surged through Rachel as she pulled on a robe and headed downstairs. She found David in the kitchen, looking disheveled in yesterday's clothes, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. What are you doing here? She demanded. I'm not ready to talk to you. I know, he said quickly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. I just came to shower and change for work. I'll get out of your way. Work, Rachel repeated incredulously. You're going to work today? Like nothing's happened? David looked confused. I have meetings I can't reschedule. The Westport project. Is that a critical— Stop! Rachel interrupted, fury building. Just stop. Do you even hear yourself? Your entire life with me has been exposed as a lie, and you're worried about the Westport project? That's not fair, David protested. Life doesn't just stop because— Because what? Because you got caught? Because after 21 years of deception, I finally learned about the daughter you've been hiding from me. Rachel's voice rose despite her effort to control it. My life has stopped, David. Everything I thought I knew about our marriage, about you, has been shattered. But by all means, don't let that interfere with your meetings. David's shoulders slumped. You're right. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. He ran a hand through his rumpled hair. I'm not handling this well. I don't know what to do. How to fix this? You can't fix it, Rachel said, the fight suddenly draining out of her. That's what you're not understanding. This isn't a problem with a solution. It's 21 years of lies that can't be undone. So what happens now? David asked, his voice small. Do you want me to move out permanently? The question hung between them, weighted with 25 years of shared history and the uncertain future ahead. I don't know what I want yet, Rachel answered honestly, except that I need time, and I need to tell Jacob and Emma. She fixed him with a hard stare. Unless you'd prefer to continue hiding the truth from them too. David winced. No, you're right. They deserve to know. He hesitated. Should we tell them together? The suggestion, its assumption of continued partnership, of a united front, sparked fresh anger in Rachel. No, she said firmly. I'll tell them. You've forfeited the right to control this narrative. Rachel, I'm going to call them today, she continued, not allowing him to interrupt. Ask them both to come home this weekend. They deserve to hear this in person. David nodded slowly. What about Cassandra? And Elaine's letter? She's expecting. An answer about the graduation. Cassandra has waited 23 years to meet her siblings, Rachel said coldly. She can wait a bit longer while I figure out how to explain to our children that their father has been living a double life. It wasn't a double life, David protested, though his objection sounded weak even to his own ears. Cassandra was just a separate part of my life. The definition of a double life, David, Rachel snapped. A family your actual family didn't know existed. David fell silent, unable to counter the accusation. From the doorway, Melissa cleared her throat. Sorry to interrupt, she said, not sounding sorry at all. But if you're done here, David, Rachel and I have plans for breakfast. It wasn't true, but Rachel shot her sister a grateful look for the intervention. David nodded, clearly recognizing he was outnumbered. I'll go get some clothes and head out. I'll stay at the hotel again tonight if that's what you want. It is, Rachel confirmed, unable to imagine sharing space with him right now. As David disappeared upstairs, Melissa approached Rachel, squeezing her shoulder supportively. You okay? No, Rachel admitted, but I will be. Somehow. She glanced at her phone, thinking of the emails from Elaine, the photographs of Cassandra, the texts from her oblivious children. I need to call Jacob and Emma today, ask them to come home this weekend. Do you want me to stay until then? Melissa offered. I can work remotely. Rachel considered the offer, tempted by the prospect of not facing this alone. But something inside her, perhaps pride, perhaps a newfound determination, made her shake her head. No, I need to do this myself, figure out what I want, what happens next. She smiled weakly at her sister. But thank you for coming last night, for everything. When David left 30 minutes later, suitcase in hand and defeated slumped to his shoulders, Rachel didn't watch from the window. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, bracing herself for the call she needed to make. To her son, to her daughter, to the future she hadn't anticipated, but now had to face. Outside, life continued its ordinary rhythm. The mail carrier delivered the day's letters. The neighbor's dog barked at a passing jogger. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started up. Normal life continuing despite the seismic shift in Rachel's reality. 25 years of marriage, 21 years of lies. And now, the daunting task of discovering what remained amid the wreckage. Rachel sat in the living room, waiting. The house was immaculate. She'd spent all morning cleaning, a futile attempt to control something when everything else felt chaotic. Jacob's car pulled into the driveway first, followed 20 minutes later by Emma's. Rachel watched through the window as her children greeted each other with casual affection, unaware of how their world was about to shift. "Mom," Jacob called as they entered. At 23, he was the spitting image of David. Same height, same easy confidence, same crinkle around the eyes when he smiled. "In here," Rachel answered, her voice steadier than she expected. Their expressions changed immediately upon seeing her face. Emma, always intuitive, spoke first. "What's wrong? Where's Dad?" "Sit down," Rachel said gently. "I need to tell you something." They exchanged concerned glances before settling on the sofa across from her. Rachel had rehearsed this moment dozens of times since David's revelation, but now, faced with her children's worried faces, words failed her. "Your father has been keeping something from us," she began finally. "Something significant." She took a deep breath. "He has another daughter. Your half-sister. She's 23, lives in Boston, and her name is Cassandra." Stunned silence filled the room. Jacob blinked rapidly, processing. Emma's face went completely blank. Her defense mechanism against emotional shock. "That's not possible," Jacob said finally. "Dad wouldn't." "He did," Rachel said firmly. "He had a brief relationship before I met him." The lie came easily, a maternal instinct to protect them from the full truth of their father's infidelity, and didn't know about the pregnancy until years later. Years. Later? Emma echoed, finding her voice. How many years later? Rachel hesitated. When the child was 2. So he's known about her for over 20 years? Jacob's voice rose. And never told us? Never told you? No, Rachel confirmed. He never told any of us. Where is he? Emma demanded, anger replacing shock. I want to hear this from him. He's staying at a hotel, Rachel explained. I asked for space to process this. Process what exactly? Jacob asked. That our father has been lying to us our entire lives? That we have a sister we've never met? That everything we thought we knew about our family is apparently bullshit? The raw pain in his voice broke Rachel's heart. This was exactly what she'd feared. Not just her own betrayal, but her children's. Does she know about us? Emma asked quietly. Yes, Rachel answered. She's known about you both for years. Apparently, she's been asking to meet you. Another silence fell, heavier than before. Rachel watched her children absorb this reality. The sister who knew they existed while they remained ignorant. The father who had methodically compartmentalized. His life, the family narrative, suddenly revealed as incomplete. I'm going to call Dad, Jacob announced, standing abruptly. I want to hear his explanation. As he stepped outside with his phone, Emma moved to sit beside Rachel, taking her hand. Are you okay, Mom? She asked, her anger temporarily set aside. In concern, Rachel squeezed her daughter's hand, tears finally breaking free. I will be, she promised. We all will be. Somehow. David arrived 40 minutes after Jacob's call, looking haggard and uncertain as he entered the home he'd left 3 days earlier. The family gathered in the living room, Rachel and Emma on the sofa, Jacob standing by the window, arms crossed. Defensively, the tension was palpable. Thank you for coming, Jacob said formally, as if addressing a stranger rather than his father. David nodded, remaining near the doorway as if unsure of his welcome. I owe you all an explanation. More than, and Emma muttered. Start with why, Jacob demanded. Why keep her secret from us? Why deny us a sister our entire lives? David sank into an armchair, shoulders slumped. It began as protection, for all of you, for Cassandra. By the time I realized my mistake, years had passed. He glanced at Rachel. The longer I waited, the harder it became to know how to tell you. That's not good enough, Emma said, voice shaking. I've spent 20 years wondering why I don't have more siblings, wishing for an older sister specifically. And you had one for me all along that you chose to hide. David winced. I know. There's no justification that makes this right. Tell us about her, Jacob said, his tone marginally softer. What's she like? For the first time, David's expression lightened. She's brilliant. Environmental engineering at Northeastern, passionate about water conservation, stubborn like you, Emma, analytical like you, Jacob. He paused. She's wanted to meet you both for years. Does she look like us? Emma asked. David reached for his wallet, extracting a photo Rachel hadn't seen, Cassandra in hiking gear on a mountain summit, grinning triumphantly. He passed it to Emma, who studied it intently before handing it to Jacob. She has your eyes, Emma told her brother quietly. An uncomfortable silence followed as the reality solidified. This unknown woman was undeniably their blood relation. What happens now? Jacob finally asked, addressing no one in particular. That's up to you, Rachel said. All of you. I won't dictate how any of you should respond to this situation. Emma looked directly at her father. I want to meet her. So, do I, Jacob agreed after a moment. David exhaled slowly, relief evident. She'll be glad to hear that. She's been waiting a long time. Not by our choice, Jacob reminded him sharply. As the conversation continued, tentative plans, questions about Cassandra's life, flares of anger mingled with curiosity. Rachel watched her family navigate this new terrain. The damage was significant, trust fundamentally broken, but beneath the hurt something else was emerging, the possibility, however fragile, of connection, of a family expanded rather than destroyed by truth, finally revealed. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, perhaps not ever entirely, but it was a step forward into whatever came next. 2 weeks later, Rachel drove alone to Boston, her thoughts as tangled as the city's notorious streets. The meeting between her children and Cassandra had been scheduled for today, a careful lunch at a neutral restaurant with David as the awkward bridge between his divided family. Rachel had originally declined to attend, needing more time, more space. But yesterday, she'd received another email from Elaine. "I understand your absence from tomorrow's lunch, but I wondered if you might be willing to meet separately. Just the two of us. No pressure on your children or Cassandra, just two women who have been affected by the same man's choices. Coffee at my apartment. No one else will know." Something in the straightforward invitation had resonated with Rachel. After a sleepless night, she'd replied with a simple yes. Now, following GPS directions to an address in Cambridge, Rachel questioned her decision. What could she possibly have to say to the woman who'd had a child with her husband? What common ground could they find? Elaine's apartment building was modest but well-maintained. Rachel hesitated before pressing the buzzer for Unit 3B. "It's open," a voice called when Rachel knocked. "Come in." Elaine Barrett was not what Rachel had imagined. In her mid-50s, she had silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail, intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses, and a calm presence that immediately filled the bright apartment. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like a college professor than a homewrecker. "Thank you for coming," Elaine said, extending her hand. "I know this couldn't have been easy." Rachel accepted the handshake, surprised by the firm grip. "I'm not entirely sure why I'm here." "Honestly, neither am I," Elaine admitted with a small smile. "But it felt important somehow." "Tea?" As they settled, in the sunny kitchen with steaming mugs, Rachel studied the apartment. Bookshelves lined the walls, plants crowded the windowsills, and framed scientific journals featured Elaine's published research. Photos of Cassandra were displayed prominently, the same milestone markers any parent would treasure. "She looks happy," Rachel observed, nodding toward a recent graduation photo. "She is, generally, but there's always been something missing." Elaine met Rachel's gaze directly. "She's known about David's other family since she was 12. It was her right to understand her full heritage." "Yet you kept the secret," Rachel noted, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "I did," Elaine acknowledged, "for which I owe you an apology. I told myself it was David's truth to tell, his responsibility, but I was complicit in the deception." The straightforward acknowledgement disarmed Rachel's prepared defensiveness. "Why reach out now, after all these years?" "Cassandra," Elaine said simply. "As she's gotten older, the questions have become more insistent, the unfairness more apparent. When she started talking about finding you all independently, I knew it was time to force David's hand." Rachel absorbed this, trying to imagine the young woman's perspective, knowing she had siblings but forbidden from connecting with them. "Did you love him, David?" Elaine's laugh held no humor. "No. It was one regrettable night at a conference. We were both tipsy, both lonely." She shook her head. "When I discovered I was pregnant, I never expected anything from him. I had my career, my independence. I only told him as a courtesy." "Then why allow him in Cassandra's life later?" Rachel asked, genuinely curious. "Because she deserved to know her father," Elaine said. "And because David seemed genuinely remorseful, genuinely interested in knowing her. I set boundaries, financial support, occasional visits. I never anticipated he'd maintain the secrecy for decades." As their conversation continued, Rachel found herself warming to Elaine despite herself. There was a refreshing directness to the woman, an absence of drama or competition that made dialogue possible. Neither victim nor villain, just another person navigating the complicated aftermath of David's choices. "They're meeting now," Rachel said, glancing at her watch. "Jacob and Emma with Cassandra." Elaine nodded. "Are you afraid of what might happen?" "I'm afraid they'll reject her," Rachel admitted, surprising herself with the truth, which would be understandable but unfair to Cassandra. None of this is her fault. "No," Elaine agreed. "Just as none of it is Jacob's or Emma's fault, or yours." The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to Rachel's eyes. "I've spent 2 weeks wondering what I did wrong, why David couldn't trust me with the truth." "The failing was his, not yours," Elaine said firmly. "Some men can't bear to confront their own mistakes, to live with others' disappointment. They'd rather construct elaborate deceptions than face simple truths." As they continued talking, the afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the kitchen. Rachel found herself sharing stories about Jacob and Emma, Elaine responding with tales of Cassandra's childhood. Two mothers, connected by circumstance rather than choice, finding unexpected common ground. When Rachel finally stood to leave, she felt lighter somehow, as if the conversation had released some of the pressure that had been building since David's revelation. "What happens now?" Elaine asked as she walked Rachel to the door. "With you and David? I'm not sure," Rachel answered honestly. 25 years isn't easily discarded, but trust, once broken so completely— She shrugged, letting the sentence hang unfinished. "For what it's worth," Elaine said, "you have incredible children. Cassandra has always wanted to know them. Whatever happens between you and David, perhaps something positive can come from them connecting." Rachel nodded, finding herself unexpectedly aligned with this woman who should have been her adversary. Perhaps. Driving back to Connecticut, Rachel's phone chimed with a text from Emma. "Just finished lunch with Cassandra. She's amazing, Mom. So smart and funny. Feels like I've known her my whole life. Can't believe Dad kept this from us. Jacob's taking her rock climbing next weekend. Can we talk when you get home?" Rachel smiled, despite the complexity of emotions swirling within her. One secret had splintered her family in ways that might never fully heal. But perhaps, from those fragments, new connections might yet emerge, different from what she'd imagined, but valuable nonetheless. For the first time, since discovering David's deception, Rachel felt something like hope for what might come next. Not restoration of what was lost, but creation of something new from the pieces that remained. Rachel sat across from David at the mediator's office, the polished conference table between them seeming wider than it actually was. 6 weeks had passed since the revelation about Cassandra. 6 weeks of separate living arrangements, family therapy sessions, and painful conversations that left them both emotionally drained. "Let's continue discussing the separation agreement," the mediator, Ms. Winters, said gently. "Have you decided about the house?" "Rachel should keep it," David said immediately. "I've found an apartment closer to work." Rachel nodded, not trusting her voice. The house where they'd raised their children now felt both comforting and haunted. Every room holding memories that were simultaneously precious and tainted. "And the retirement accounts?" Ms. Winters asked. The discussion continued, practical matters of dividing a life built over 25 years. Not quite divorce, not yet. Just separation, while they determined whether anything remained worth salvaging. Afterward, they walked to the parking lot together in uncomfortable silence. "Jacob mentioned he's taking Cassandra hiking this weekend," Rachel said finally. "Emma's joining them." David's expression brightened. "Yes, Cassandra told me. She's excited." He hesitated. "It's good, isn't it, that they've connected so quickly?" "It is," Rachel agreed. The relationship developing between her children and their half-sister had been the one positive outcome of this ordeal. Weekly texts had become regular phone calls, which had evolved into shared outings that all three clearly cherished. "Rachel," David began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what Dr. Moore said in therapy, about transparency being the only way forward." He took a deep breath. "I'd like you to have access to all my emails, my phone, everything. No more secrets, ever." She studied the man she'd loved for half her life, the silver in his hair she'd watched appear, the laugh lines she'd helped create, the eyes that had witnessed her transition from young bride to middle-aged woman, the man who had lied to her. Face every day for 21 years. "It's not about access, David," she said finally. "It was never about being able to check up on you. It was about knowing the truth, about being partners in reality, not a fantasy you constructed." He nodded, accepting her words without defense. 6 weeks of therapy had at least accomplished that. An end to the justifications, the excuses. "I miss you," he said simply. Rachel felt the familiar ache, the yearning for what had been, what she'd believed they had. "I miss who I thought you were," she answered honestly. As she drove home alone, Rachel's phone rang, Elaine calling, their weekly check-in that had evolved naturally after their first meeting. "I just got off the phone with Cassandra," Elaine said after their greetings. "She's thrilled about the hiking trip with Jacob and Emma." "They're excited too," Rachel replied, still marveling at the ease of conversation with a woman who should have been her adversary, but had become something like a friend. "How was the mediation?" Elaine asked. "Difficult," Rachel admitted, "but necessary." "And you? How are you holding up?" Rachel considered the question seriously as she pulled into her driveway, their driveway, soon to be just hers. "I'm surviving. Some days are harder than others." She watched a pair of cardinals in the maple tree they'd planted when Jacob was born. "I keep wondering if forgiveness is possible." "Forgiveness doesn't mean restoring what was," Elaine said thoughtfully. "Sometimes it just means releasing the anger so you can move forward, with or without him." After they hung up, Rachel sat in her car, contemplating Elaine's words. Forward, with or without David. The choice loomed, still unmade. Could she rebuild? A marriage on the ashes of such profound deception. Did she even want to try? The sun was setting as she finally entered the house, casting long shadows across the entryway. On the hall table sat 3 framed photographs: Jacob's college graduation, Emma's high school musical, and the newest addition, Jacob, Emma, and Cassandra, grinning from a Boston Harbor cruise. 3 siblings who had found each other despite the barriers constructed to keep them apart. Rachel touched the frame gently. One secret had destroyed the family she thought she had. But perhaps from those fragments, a different kind of family might yet emerge. Larger, more complex, built on difficult truths rather than comfortable lies. It wasn't what she had expected at 52, but perhaps it could be enough. The restaurant was David's suggestion, the same small Italian place where he had proposed 26 years earlier. Rachel recognized the gesture for what it was, symbolic, deliberate, a callback to beginnings as they discussed potential endings. 4 months had passed since she'd discovered his secret. 4 months of separate lives intersecting only at therapy sessions, family gatherings that now included Cassandra, and practical discussions about finances and property. "You look beautiful," David said as she sat across from him. Rachel accepted the compliment with a nod. At 52, she knew her beauty had matured, changed, much like their relationship. "Thank you for meeting me," he continued. "I know you've been thinking." Indeed, she had. Weeks of contemplation, of weighing decades of shared history against one monumental betrayal, of questioning whether trust, once so completely broken, could ever be restored. "I have," she confirmed, studying the man who had been her husband. For 25 years, the man she had believed she knew completely, their conversation over appetizers remained carefully neutral. Updates about Jacob's new job, Emma's graduate school applications, Cassandra's internship at an environmental engineering firm. The children's growing bond had been the unexpected gift amid the wreckage, three siblings forging connections that seemed to strengthen weekly. "Rachel," David said finally, setting down his fork, "I've given you space, tried to respect your process. But I need to know, where do we stand?" She had anticipated the question, had rehearsed her answer, yet now, faced with his vulnerable expression, the words caught in her throat. "I've been seeing Dr. Moore individually," she began carefully. "Working through what happened, what it means." David nodded. They had started therapy together but had transitioned to separate sessions as Rachel processed her anger, her grief. "The thing is," she continued, "forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing. I understand now that I can forgive you without returning to our marriage." David's face fell, though he clearly tried to hide his disappointment. "I see. I don't hate you anymore," Rachel said gently. "I understand how one decision led to another, how the lie grew too big to escape. I even understand your intentions, misguided as they were, to protect everyone involved." "But," David prompted, "but I can't be married to someone I don't trust," Rachel stated simply. "And I don't know if I'll ever fully trust you again." David nodded slowly, acceptance in his expression, though pain lingered in his eyes. "I understand. I do." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Your strength through all this, your grace with Cassandra." "She's a remarkable young woman," Rachel acknowledged. "You and Elaine did well with her." "Mostly Elaine," David corrected with a small smile. "I was just the occasional visitor." They finished dinner discussing practical matters, finalizing the separation, telling the children about their decision, navigating holidays and family events that would now include Cassandra. Outside the restaurant, standing beside their respective cars, David hesitated. "Is this goodbye then?" Rachel considered the question. "Not goodbye," she decided, "just a different chapter. We're still Jacob and Emma's parents, and now, in some complicated way, we're both part of Cassandra's life too. A different kind." "Of family," David suggested. "Yes," Rachel agreed. "Not what I expected, but real, honest, finally." As she drove home, to the house that was now legally hers alone, Rachel felt an unexpected lightness, not happiness exactly, but peace, the certainty that came with a difficult decision finally made. Her phone chimed with a text from Emma. "Can't wait for you to see Cassandra's new apartment next weekend. She says she has your watercolor hanging in the living room." Rachel smiled. One secret had ended her marriage, but expanded her family in ways she never could have anticipated. Life at 52 wasn't what she had planned, but perhaps it could be something equally valuable, a future built on truth rather than illusion, with connections that were chosen rather than assumed. It was enough. 1 year later, Rachel adjusted the collar of her dress as she stood in Northeastern University's auditorium. The seats around her filled quickly. Jacob and Emma to her left, Elaine to her right, David 2 rows ahead with his new girlfriend, a kind physician he'd been dating for 3 months. "Cassandra Barrett," the announcer called. Rachel joined the applause as her children's half-sister crossed the stage to receive her master's degree, her smile visible even from a distance. "She looks so happy," Emma whispered, snapping photos. Rachel nodded, watching the young woman who had entered their lives so unexpectedly, yet had become an integral part of their family. The pain of David's deception hadn't vanished. Such betrayals left permanent marks, but it had receded, becoming part of their shared history rather than a defining wound. After the ceremony, they gathered outside for photographs. Rachel stood slightly apart, observing as Jacob lifted Cassandra in a celebratory hug, as Emma presented her with flowers, as Elaine beamed with maternal pride, as David awkwardly but earnestly congratulated his firstborn daughter. Family photo. Cassandra's boyfriend called, gesturing for everyone to group together. Rachel hesitated only briefly before stepping into the frame. This wasn't the family she had expected to have at 53. Divorced, expanded, complicated by past secrets and new connections. But as she smiled for the camera, surrounded by her children, her ex-husband, and the women who had once been strangers, she recognized the truth. Family wasn't always what you planned. Sometimes it was what you built from the ruins of shattered expectations, messy, imperfect, but real, and that was enough.